and welcome to another Working for You program. I am Les Roy Williams. Thank you very much for joining us for our program today. As usual, your company is appreciated from week to week. So thank you very much for being with us. Of course, we continue to provide you with very pertinent and relevant information as to what is happening here in St. Kitts and Nevis within departments, ministries of government, and so on, so that you can be informed as to how the government is actually working for you. Its programs, its policies, its events, what is actually going on. Today we are going to be having a discussion on accreditation standards and so on. June 9th is World Accreditation Day. We will hear all about it. And I have with me in studio officials from the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards who will engage you in these discussions. I have Dr. Marcus Natter, who is the Science and Research Manager and Quality Manager at the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, and Mr. Jermaine Mike, Head of Standards at the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here today. Now, June 9th is the observance of World Accreditation Day, and it is being celebrated under the theme Sustainability and Economic Growth and the Environment. Dr. Natter, I'm going to start with you. What is the observance of World Accreditation Day? What is World Accreditation Day all about?
Well, thanks so much again, Mr. Williams, for the invitation, and of course on behalf of our director, St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, we are grateful for the opportunity to impart some knowledge about our work, and in particular at this time accreditation. When we speak about World Accreditation Day, it's held June 9th. It's organized by the International Accreditation Forum as well as the International Laboratory Accreditation Committee. And with this, the world globally looks at laboratory accreditation in particular. Of course, we recognize there's accreditation of tertiary institutions, higher institutions of learning and other areas. For us at the Bureau of Standards, we are dealing with laboratory accreditation. So every June 9th, activities are held in commemoration of World Accreditation Day and looking at the importance of accreditation. This year, the theme, as you just mentioned, focuses around the way that standards and accreditation can assist in us reaching and attaining the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course were set back in 2015 and due to be met hopefully in 2030. And so World Accreditation Day globally will be looking at how we can work with economic growth to meet these Sustainable Development Goals.
Right, so what is accreditation? When we speak about accreditation, what actually are we speaking about?
So when we talk about accreditation, we again have to make sure we separate ourselves from, like I said, universities and so forth. However, accreditation is an independent assessment by what is normally called an accreditation body, a third party, to verify that a body is meeting a particular set of international or regional standards and exhibiting competence with those standards as well as impartiality, as the case may be. Now, I'd like to just mention that certification and accreditation are often, intertwined. And when we speak about certification, often we certify to a particular standard, and an entire entity like the Bureau can be certified, for example, to a quality management system or an inspection body can be certified to do inspections. But when we speak about accreditation, we speak about accreditation to a specific product, a process, or service. So whereas a university can be accredited to teach a whole gamut of courses, a laboratory is accredited to a specific test, and so, or tests as the case may be. So when we speak about that type of accreditation, we are talking about, for example, being accredited to do, a medical lab could be accredited to do a COVID-19, we're in the pandemic still, COVID-19 test, but they may have a gamut of other tests that they are not necessarily accredited to do. So that's a bit of the slight difference, but still quite similar between accreditation and certification.
Is the Bureau of Standards accredited?
No. So the Bureau of Standards does not perform any accredited services at this time. We are working assiduously towards accreditation right now. We are very close in our process towards accreditation for chemical analyses, specifically pH testing. And Mr. Mike, he wears another hat, and he is the head of air quality. And we are working towards accreditation to some of our indoor air quality monitoring analyses, specifically looking at toxic gases. And we hope before the end of 2022 that I can come back and say to you, yes, we are accredited to do these particular analyses. But notwithstanding, I just want to say that we still follow all of the internationally recognized standards in all of the testing that we do. It's just that we have not gone through that rigorous process of accreditation and have that final stamp of approval where we can plaster a nice certificate and say we are accredited.
What does that rigorous process entail? Because I know, for example, before a college or a university gets accredited, you have to have certain things in place in order for it to pass the test, so to speak,
yes,
so that they can get accredited. So what would that process entail for you to reach to that stage of passing the test and being accredited?
So it involves quite a bit. For us, in particular, we tend to, our whole region, I think, we tend to know what we're doing, but we never document it. And so one of the key components of working towards accreditation is making sure you document everything. Because the process of accreditation is to check the checkers and to check that what you say you're doing, you're actually doing. And you can only show that with evidence, forms, records, and so on. So that was our very first task. We knew what we were doing in a lot of areas, but some of the tasks were not fully documented. So that was a key component. And we have to also do some internal assessment before we invite a third party to come in. So we have to do our own internal audit on ourselves. Are we doing what we say we are doing? And can we prove that what we are doing is correct according to the standard? So those are the things that we are going through right now at the Bureau of Standards. And we will then call in, you would have to call in a third party to come and do what is called an external audit. And from that, they may point out some non-conformances here and there, which you need to then correct before being given the accreditation. Sometimes you get provisional, pending your completion of certain tasks, and then you get fully accredited once you meet all of those.
Now, Mr. Mike, you hold the position of head of standards, and I suppose that, we are looking at standardization. We can speak about conformity assessment. I know that the Bureau has what you call metrology and so on there, but how can metrology, standardization, conformity assessment support the shift to sustainability in economic growth and the environment? Earlier, Dr. Natta spoke about air quality and toxic gases, and he spoke also about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So how can all of these things, conformity assessment, standardization, metrology, how can they support the shift to sustainability in economic growth and the environment?
It's a very loaded question, yeah?
Give a loaded answer.
Well, I just give a brief answer. Of course, what I give cannot encompass everything that it will take to make the shift. But we did something that we call a national quality policy, where it encompasses all of these aspects that you spoke of, where it spoke of conformity assessment, metrology, standardization, and so forth. And when you bring all of these things together, they build or strengthen the national quality infrastructure, right? When you build a national quality infrastructure, you tell, I guess, the global sphere or the global market that, hey, SKNIS and NIVIS are doing all of these things. Hence, you can see, well, hopefully by doing this, you can have a boost in trade, which would have a boost in economics. When you're using standards, you can also, standards have a health and safety aspect to it. It also does have trade implications in terms of it can help you quell some of those trade disputes and so forth, where you can cost big money. I mean, we had a trade dispute, I mean, maybe a touchy subject, but we had a trade dispute with Belize before, right? And was not some of these things, although it didn't pertain specifically to standards, maybe would have been able to help us in that area, right? So that is just some of the ways that that those areas help us. And Dr. Natter, I mean, he was also in charge of disseminating the information, especially for the national quality policy. So he has, based on what I say, I'm sure he has some stuff to say on it as well, right? But we were working together on that. So as I said, it was a very loaded question, but there are multiple. If we kind of go, we'll just kind of go down into the rabbit hole.
Right. Dr. Nati?
Sure. So economic growth that comes at the expense of us harming the planet is not sustainable, right? And accreditation and likewise standards are critically important to us not allowing that to happen. As I think it was Emmanuel Macron, somebody who said, there's no planet B. Right? There's no planet B. This is our planet. So the idea is how can standards, how can accreditation help us meet these sustainable development goals? And what standards do in particular is give us a sense of trust, right? Because when we make a product or perform a service that is meeting an internationally recognized standard, and then you get accreditation on top of that, we often say accredited once, accepted everywhere, okay? So that means if we have accredited services here in St. Kitts and Nevis, again, environmentally based to fight climate change, etc., that if we export a product, as Mr. Mike talked about trade, if somebody wants to export their services, it is accepted everywhere. So accredited once, accepted everywhere. And that's the sort of mindset we want persons to have from our government right down to the man on the street. And so the Bureau of Standards is working hard to inculcate that in the minds of persons. But again, we ourselves as a Bureau, we are working towards accreditation for some of our analyses so that we can also say we are setting an example that we want to see other entities follow.
Right, but having standards is one thing, but then ensuring compliance with those standards is another thing. And so therefore, having the standards, ensuring the compliance to the standards is just as important as having those standards. So what can we say to in terms of the ensuring compliance with those standards? even with respect to the environment, we can speak about clean water, we can speak about sanitation, we can speak about the safety in terms of what we consume, in terms of our food, and all of that.
So when you speak on standards and compliance to standards, typically a standard and a regulation, which is the compliant part, right? They're rather different, but they kind of work in tandem, or they support each other. So for example, we may adopt a standard for packaged water. You just mentioned water, right? Packaged water. Packaged water can come in bottled, they can come in bottled, they can come in cans, they can come in cups, whatever, right? But if we have a standard for packaged water, we can essentially say, well, hey, look, here are some of the technical aspects or criteria within that standard that speaks to health and safety of the people. Because as Dr. Natta had said before, when you speak of standards, you speak to trust, right? And when you speak to trust, you have to make sure that people follow what is there, right? So this is where you can regulate either an entire standard and make everybody conform to that entire standard, or you can say, well, okay, here are some of the aspects within the standard. We want to make sure that your bottled water or packaged water is microbially clean. This is a very big issue for us as a country in terms of health and so forth. No, well, I'm not saying presently, but it may be a very big issue in terms of health. People drink bottled water and they trust that it is safe, right? So we may say, well, we want to make sure that this doesn't cause intestinal problems. And so we may say, well, hey, based on the standard, you have to make sure that it conforms to this particular aspect when it comes to microbial contamination of that product. And so this is how they work in tandem with each other, where you can regulate part of a standard, or you can regulate all of the standard if you choose so. If you choose to be. It just depends on how important it is to the country, whether it is health or the environment or national security.
Right. So while we talk about accreditation and environmental sustainability, I suppose we have to look at different things like testing, just inspection, certification, validation, and verification.
Yes.
Right? We have to look. And we have a lab at the Bureau, but that lab, according to Dr. Nutter, is not yet accredited. Right? So I suppose the movement towards getting that lab accredited, while we're doing certain things and we're moving in the right direction, having that lab accredited would speak more to our competence, our reliability,
and trust.
And trust and so on.
Yes.
And, market us.
Yes.
In a better light in terms of our relationship with the other countries and things like that. Right, so we agree that accreditation is important and that it can actually help with environmental sustainability. Now, it is my understanding that the Bureau has embarked on vehicle inspection.
Yes, it's a very touchy subject.
Vehicle inspection. And I suppose that may tie into the environmental sustainability as well.
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Mike, tell us, what is vehicle inspection? Why are vehicle inspections important? And why did the Bureau decide to take up this issue, to tackle this issue?
Well, I'll try and answer the why first, right? Because, we got complaints from the general public. We also got complaints from the public sector government, offices and so forth. So this is why we had embarked on that. Now, in terms of the vehicle inspection, there's two aspects to it. There's the one when it comes to importation, right? And then there's the one where you do it regularly, like every year, or for some other vehicles like the omnibuses and so forth, you may do it 2 times per year. In terms of the one that are coming in, maybe from Japan and that kind of thing, we had started some work in that, where if you're ordering a vehicle from Japan, it is to be inspected before it enters our country. Therefore, when you get a vehicle, when you order a vehicle and it lands in St. Kitts and Nevis, it's supposed to be able to drive safely. Now, we have had the issue where people order vehicles, they come in, something is wrong with them. They have to go spend a lot of money and so forth to get these fixed. They're not properly tested. There may be some radiation contamination. We don't have radiation here, but over there may have. So all of these things, and so you may have an irradiated vehicle coming into the country and so forth. So these are some of the things that we kind of have to look at. Now, in terms of having it in St. Kitts and Nevis, we are mostly looking at roadworthiness to ensure that once your vehicle is tested, you check your brakes and lights and all of that thing. The mechanics are very versed in what should be tested and so forth. But we want to make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy. And that inspection should carry a lot of weight, because you want to make sure that when you drive, you feel there's a level of confidence in that inspection that was done. And so far, the general public don't seem to be confident in the inspection. So we embarked on it to, essentially, one of the other reasons why we embarked on it is to harmonize the inspection process across the varying mechanical shops or inspectors, the vehicle inspectors, to make sure that if you go to Tom, he's doing the same thing. You go to Dick, he's doing the same thing, and Harry is also doing the same thing. So no matter where you go, you should be confident in the vehicle inspection that you get, and trust the vehicle inspection that you get.
Right, so what are some of the criteria that the vehicle standard will address? What actually are you trying to achieve? Because, what do you want to achieve?
Well, as health and safety on the road, that's essentially what we are trying to do. Because people are not, they don't trust the inspection, they tend to not feel safe. Now, and people have alluded to, they don't feel that when they drive and meander on the road and so forth, some of these things, accidents that have happened could have been prevented. And this is just what people have, when they call in, this is what they feel, that some of these things could have been avoided if they had a proper vehicle inspection. One guy said he was just pressing brakes, but there was no brakes, and he just had a vehicle inspection, right? So, these are the concerns of the public, and we kind of have to address it. And the only way to, well, not the only way, but one of the ways to address it is by getting all of the varying stakeholders, those that drive vehicles and those that inspect vehicles and those that regulate this inspection process, bring them together and say, well, hey, look, how can we tackle this problem? What are some of the things that we know we need? What are some of the tools and expertise that is needed in an inspection shop to ensure that this particular shop is qualified or can be certified to a particular standard, to say, hey, I have all of the necessary things in place, I can be a vehicle inspector. As it is right now, we don't necessarily have a standard. There's something within the Police Act, right, in terms of what you have to do, but maybe enforcement is an issue. I'm not entirely sure, but we are tackling it as we go along, I guess we'll find out some of the issues why some of the things are not done and whatnot.
Because it seems to me, Mr. Mike, that if you're going to be speaking about vehicle inspection and you're going to have certain inspectors, then there must be some standard. There must be standards that you can say, well, look, this is what we are looking for. This does not live up to a particular standard when the inspection is done. This falls below, you know, it gets a failing grade or a passing grade or whatever the case is. So the standard would be that which the inspection is actually judged against. So whether it lives up to that standard or it falls below that standard. So what are the standards? Or are there any standards for vehicle inspection? I mean, you're the head of standards.
Yes. So we have looked at a few. We are looking at a few. One, we are looking at 2 Caribbean one. I think one was Bahamas. One is Bahamas. Another one is from St. Lucia, but we are also looking at an African one, a Nigeria one. Now, when we first got the stakeholders together and we mentioned that we had a Nigerian standard, a Kenyan standard. It was a Kenyan standard. You know, people started, you know, kind of chuckling and so forth, not knowing that this standard is extremely stringent, right? It's very, very safe. For example, they do not allow, they drive on the right-hand side. The steering wheel is on the right, and whatever. They do not allow any vehicles whatsoever in their country that is left-handed. And this is, they cite health hazards associated with it, right? Like basically, if you're on the left-hand side, you can't, if you want to overtake another vehicle, you cannot see, and so forth. So they had enough data to justify their position. Now, so would we want to do that here in St. Kitts and Nevis? Maybe, maybe not. The discussion hasn't reached that far as yet, but we're looking to see. We're making sure that we have a harmonized checklist. You know, every time you go to the vehicle inspection, you have a checklist that they are supposed to go through, right? So we're making sure that there is a harmonized checklist on board. And we would be looking at those 3 standards to see what it is that we can use. Essentially, what we would be doing is developing a national standard. Essentially what we would be doing. Or we may say, well, okay, we like the Bahamas one, so we may try and adopt the one from Bahamas since they already have it already nicely tailored. But there are a few options that we are looking at. It just depends on what our stakeholders and so forth would like.
You spoke about, let us take, for example, our roads. Let us take our weather, the climate here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and how that may impact on the vehicle. So, for example, let us look at tires. For example, one may ask themselves, why it is that my tires wear down so quickly? Am I using the right tires? Is what I am getting, are the snow tires? So
when we look at other countries, well, one of the countries that is very stringent on tires, Jamaica. When it comes to especially used tires, they inspect 100% of their used tires. They do not allow any tires to pass through, especially if it is used. But you are quite right in stating that we should not allow any tires that are not rated for our weather to pass through our borders. And tire inspection is part of the importation process on used vehicles that are coming in, and even when you're doing it here domestically. It is part of the process, more so for the metrology section, because they have to go into things like tread depth and those kind of things, right? So where you have the measuring devices and what's not, even the inspectors here would have to even be measuring those kind of things, but it will have to be based on the inspection standard again, right? So yes, it is very important because if you leave a mechanic shop and you have been inspected and they have said that your tires are good, roadworthy, and shortly after you go and it's found that your tires were not up to specs or whatever the case may be, there can be implications for that inspection. What they call it, litigation. So it's yes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think what was critical in what he mentioned earlier is that we have to have a wide cross-section of persons giving us input to develop the standard. And so in the meeting that he mentioned, we looked at customs. So you're talking about importation. Customs, of course, is always our first line of defense. You know, we don't make these things. We don't make tires, we don't make vehicles. So they are always our first point. And so their input is going to be critical, looking at tires, the environmental aspect of it in terms of age of the vehicle and so forth. Then we also have the police arm, because how many times many of us are driving at night and we think it's a motorbike coming towards us, and when it gets closer you see it's a truck or a car because one headlight is out. And if you check, maybe the person's license plate is a 5 and they should have just gotten the thing inspected, right? So how did that pass inspection and is on the road? So we would need the police also to be a part of it, and we almost need inspectors for the inspectors, right? Yeah. Because if you are going to an inspection body to check your vehicle and they check 5 things, but the checklist has 20, yet they check off all 20, we need persons to be able to inspect them as well and make sure they are carrying out the inspection correctly based on the standard that we are working towards developing. So it's a whole web of different entities and persons that are needed, and we're continuing. We had one meeting already. We're continuing to meet with stakeholders to make sure we cover all our bases when we develop this standard, and ultimately put some regulations to it so that people will comply, because you can't just go on voluntary compliance nowadays in many instances, and especially when you're dealing with health and safety and so on, you have to be very strong and stringent in terms of your regulations.
But, sorry, so what the first step that we are doing is developing the standard. We are not saying that we're taking over inspection from anybody, correct, right? Because I don't want the police to say while we're here they're saying who gave Bureau of Standards the authority to do this and so forth. We're not taking. We're just developing the standard to govern or to help in the process of
okay, so you're just developing the standard. You're not involved in the certification.
We can be, yes, but at this point in time, we're not, but we can be. Okay. Yes, because we are the national certification body, right? So yes.
So you would have to have people who are certified. You'll have to have people who are knowledgeable in terms of the standards that you would formulate, so that these inspectors would basically know what it is that they are to look for when they are doing inspections, and there must be some sort of ensuring compliance as well, that the inspectors are compliant with the standards that have been set for vehicle inspection, because that too is extremely important, because then they have to understand that if they are not complying with the standards, then they are contributing to the problem, or jeopardizing health actually and safety.
Yes, we've sent. Well, I just want to state this. Since we had our first meeting, it was very difficult to get our first meeting and so forth, because stakeholders were skeptical or a little bit apprehensive, and we even got some. I won't name names or anything like that, but we even got calls to say that they are not interested in supporting or being a part of the process, right? So I want to take this time out to urge those people, right? Whether you are from the general public or from an association or from a group or whatever the case may be, to try and be a part of the process, because if you are not part of the process and that standard is passed and then begins to be regulated, you did not have a voice, you did not say whether this is possible, whether this is not possible, and so forth, right? So I want to urge some of the stakeholders out there to try and contact the Bureau of Standards to see if they can be a part of the process. It's very important, right? It can, before you know it, the process could have already gone, leave you without you having so much of an input in it. We have to become more standard conscious-minded, to put it bluntly, right? We have to be more oriented to that. The world looks at standards, so if we need to trade or to show that we value health and safety and those kind of things, we need to have that mindset of standards, right? Don't just leave it up to the Bureau of Standards. We are not the experts in everything. That is why we come out and we contact everybody else to say, well, hey, look, this is what we want to do. Please help us with it.
I mean, we have a lot of vehicles on our roads. There are many vehicles on our roads, and if standards are not adhered to in terms of these inspectors and so on, you are correct. There can be multiple accidents and
Especially because we have a thriving tourism industry, right? We have to make sure that those things are safe, because right now, how things are, an individual can sue a country. They can sue an entity. They can sue the whole country. So we need to ensure that when they are coming to our country, we can assure them that, hey, we are using standards for these things. Hence, we are sure that these things are safe, at very least. You know what I mean? Yes.
Yeah, I'm interested in something you said earlier, Mr. Mike, in terms of these imported vehicles and the levels of radiation. Well, what can you say to that? That too can affect the person's health.
Yes, it can. Like, for example, customs, as Dr. Natta had said earlier, customs is the first line of defense, right? And we don't have radiation or material that are radioactive here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but that doesn't mean it isn't there for other countries, right? Like radon and uranium and so forth is the issues in other countries. But what we're trying to say, they tend to want to sell out those vehicles to our country, kind of like a dumping ground. And we go online, we see it, it looks good, and so we bring it back. But then we don't know where that vehicle was. We don't know what it was doing. And one of the ways that you can know is to just have a Geiger counter to tell you the level of radiation that was there. I'm sure we could probably be driving, some people could probably be driving in some of those vehicles, but we don't know, right? So these are just some of the things that you would never have thought of radiation in a vehicle. As far as you know, it looks good. But there are some things that you can't see can hurt you. Some things that you can't see can hurt you. And so it is one of our duties to ensure that whenever you buy from out there, that it is a safe buy.
Okay, so we are speaking about, it is such an important issue that we are discussing in terms of the health and safety, the implementation of standards to ensure that, there's health and safety and so on. When can the public expect to have these standards? Is there a timeline?
You're right to chuckle, because it depends on the vim or the fervor of the stakeholders and how well they want to participate in it. Right? We can go ahead, as I said, not a mechanic. None of our Bureau of Standards staff is mechanic, right? So if we were to do it by ourselves, it will take us a long time. It will take us a while. And even if we were to say, okay, we complete it, who would use it? As far as they're concerned, they didn't have any input in it, right? So why is Bureau of Standards coming with this? So the time frame is dependent upon the stakeholders and how quickly they would want it. Now, just because I don't want to seem like too totalitarian, but just because they don't want to, if they decide to drag the process out and so forth, the standard process will still continue. This standard is coming. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get it done.
Right, and so therefore, of course you need the cooperation, the collaboration, you need the participation of the stakeholders, you need their input, and you need all of that, because you don't want to have this top-down approach.
Yeah.
You want to have a bottom-up approach, while you are the ones eventually who are going to make the standards. You want to ensure that they have had, the stakeholders have had some sort of input, that they have brought the issues and so on. But what can you do in terms of an education campaign, education drive, in going to them and impressing upon them the importance of having these standards?
Well, when it comes to what can I do in terms of education? Well, other than the normal forms of media and so forth, but primarily what we're going to them to explain to them is that by implementing standards economically, it is better for you. So, for example, let's say you have a shop. Just as an example, you have a vehicle inspection shop. I go in, I realize, well, my brake light is out. Because we have that, and I'm just using brake light as one, because we have that vehicle inspection standard and so forth in there, you can essentially have other forms of revenue coming in. So for example, you may have a section here where you said, well, I'm selling brake lights on the spot, where we can just change a brake light on the spot instead of having to send you somewhere else. It just kind of put more innovation towards the process. You get more financial gain from it, from implementing inspection standards. Well, standards in general. Yes.
Okay. Right. Now, Mr. Natter, what are some of the benefits of accreditation? What would you say some of the benefits are?
Yeah. So the benefits are vast, right? And for various stakeholders. For governments, I'll start with governments. For governments in particular, again, because accreditation verifies you're doing something in a competent way, in an impartial way, based on a particular internationally recognized standard, governments can actually increase their efficiency in how they're doing services, how you're dealing with customers. A lot of these international standards now have a strong customer focus. And you need a whole other series of shows to talk about customer service, right? But there are standards that address that, and accreditation, if governments, departments and so on get accredited to various standards or certified to certain systems, that can improve efficiency a lot. and improve also the way governments budget and also allocate resources to various ministries. When it comes to, for example, manufacturers, again, efficiency is critically important. So if you're accredited to do a particular manufacturing process, the standard was already, tested and commented and bantered about, as Mr. Mike would have said, for years. International standards take years to be done. Our national standards, we won't take years. So that means everyone globally essentially had an input. So this is the best way to do this. So if manufacturers adhere to that standard, again, you're improving your optimization, your efficiency, you're saving money, saving time, and saving production costs and all of that, right? When it comes to us as the consumers now, what accreditation does, as we've been saying today, is gives us that confidence, right? Gives us that confidence. There are a lot of things that we buy in stores, and we don't realize they have, labels on them that have standards. Because standards are, for example, ISO. We haven't even mentioned ISO today, Mike, but ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, and they're like the top organization when it comes to standards. And St. Kitts and Nevis is a member of ISO. So you always see these codes: ISO 14001, ISO 17025. So if you look at some of your devices, sometimes you see these codes. That tells you, that gives you that confidence, right? You see energy efficiency labels. All of these things give you confidence that what you're buying is quality in our layman terms, right? And so for consumers, accreditation gives us that trust, that confidence to go out and buy something. So if Mr. Williams, Leslie Williams, has a label that shows his product is accredited, but Marcus Natter, right next to him on the shelf, doesn't have that label, even though yours might be more expensive, I'm going to go and, as a consumer, and get that one because I'm assured, okay, this is a product that has been tried, tested, proven, right? And so those are the benefits overall. Now, as Mr. Mike was saying, with standards that are voluntary, and then sometimes we turn them into law, the reason people follow standards, even though they are, voluntary, unless made into law, is for all of those benefits that I talked about. So when you put that seal of approval, that seal showing, hey, I'm adhering to this standard, that gives your consumers confidence to use your product or your service. And again, we're talking about economic growth and sustainability. That is what accreditation gives to us all, from the government right down to us as consumers, the man on the street.
So you think that accreditation is somehow playing a pivotal role in terms of climate change?
Yeah, definitely. Climate change has sort of become sort of a buzzword, and people just say it by the by. But for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, especially, it is really, really critical because we see the effects of climate change way more than the larger countries. We could see the shrinking shorelines. We could feel the more intense hurricanes and storms and so on. So our adherence, as well as the international community's adherence to certain standards that deal with, again, energy efficiency, that deal with how do we deal with toxic chemicals and waste, how do we dispose of them safely, all of these things that contribute to climate change. How do manufacturers use standards to make sure that their processes use less or emit less carbon into the atmosphere and so on. All of that would help, climate change and reduce its effects on us. So accreditation is extremely critical now. A lot of companies, especially in the industrialized world, are using standards, looking at accreditation to certain standards to ensure that their carbon footprint is reduced and that greenhouse gas emissions are significantly reduced.
Right. Now, I know that World Accreditation Day is about 2 weeks away. Okay, it's on the 9th of June. Do you have any plans of how you're going to celebrate it? Is the Bureau going to do anything? It's not one of those days, I think, that the public has a lot of information on. You know, and so on. When they hear world accreditation, they probably don't know what it is, and that is why we are having this discussion. So, what plans do the Bureau have to recognize this thing?
Yes. So the pandemic, unfortunately, curtailed a lot of our activities over the last 2 years. This year, we want to make sure we do something in recognition of world accreditation there. One of the things we will do for sure is put out a video that explains exactly what is accreditation and what the Bureau of Standards is doing in that regard to promote accreditation and for our own Bureau seek accreditation as well. We would have loved to say on World Accreditation Day that we are accredited to do a particular test and so on, but we are not quite there yet. So hopefully next World Accreditation Day, if all goes well. But one of the other things we would do is put out some information for the public as well to digest. There's often a joint statement that is shared from the International Accreditation Forum, so we would make that available. We're on social media, we have our website, so we'll definitely be putting out information there. We've had accreditation day fairs before, but this year we won't be doing that. So primarily we'll be using our social media platforms and using the good services from your department as well. St. Kitts and Nevis Information Services to again reach the public, not only here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but of course in worldwide, and let them know that we here in St. Kitts and Nevis are serious about accreditation, serious about quality in terms of everything that we do here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Mr. Mike, standards, and let us get back to the theme for World Accreditation Day, sustainable in economic growth and the environment. What are some of the challenges that we have in terms of the environment vis-a-vis the standards that the Bureau has and ensuring compliance with those standards?
Haven't done much standards when it comes to be honest, being honest, we haven't done too much standards when it comes to environment per se. It's mostly under the purview of the Ministry of Environment, right? And
but work along with them.
Yes, when it comes
for example, when it comes to testing of water, testing of soil, maybe testing of air quality, all of those things are extremely important in terms of when you talk about the environment.
Yeah, so we have been busy when it comes to a lot of especially air quality. As we were saying, we do mold gases and the particulate matter. And the particulate matter, to break it down in the layman's terms, if you just picture a beam of light coming through a window and you see those particles circulating in that beam of light, and we've all seen it, right? Those are what we consider as particulate matter. They can be hazardous to you in terms of breathing and what's that. But in terms of the environment, and when we're talking about the standards, we would be looking at more so energy efficiency, right? So in adopting more energy efficiency standards, namely for LED bulbs, refrigerators, and air condition, by adopting these energy efficiency standards and so forth, as well as having the energy efficiency building code, if those are implemented holistically, we can essentially lower the carbon footprint that we have, and therefore making our impact, our small impact, as well as small as it may be, our impact on the environment in terms of trying to save it as well and be as sustainable as possible, right?
A lot of this talk that we're having, I suspect there's a lot of ignorance in terms of what standards actually are. For example, what are the standards that you would look for in buying an electronic item? For example, in buying a refrigerator, a washing machine, you know, things like that. What are the standards that I must look for as a lay person? If you know, in terms of my understanding, if I want to contribute in a better way to the environment and so on. And then on the other hand, bringing in stuff, importing things into the country. What standards does the country have in terms of the importation of certain things? That is my point, because if I am going to be importing certain things into the country, then there must be some body, some regulatory body in terms of what I can import and in terms of what I cannot import. Because what I import can impact upon the environment, can impact upon health and safety, can impact on a lot of things.
I hear you. We hear you. Currently, that when it comes to what you can import and what's not, don't have the standards or the regulations. The only regulations that you may have in place are those that you have to satisfy the requirements from the customs side. So whether you have to have, well, I don't particularly know the requirements or the legal aspects that customs would require you to have, right? But from a standards and a technical regulations side, we do not have it currently. We're working on it in terms of the standards, as I said, the energy efficiency. We already have the energy efficiency building code, but when it comes to air conditioning labeling and refrigeration labeling, and it's just mostly electronics labeling as a whole. So if you can go into a hardware store, like I've seen washing machines in hardware stores that are totally in Spanish. This should not be. The instructions are in Spanish, right? That should not be. And even though it is not a environmental labeling thing per se, it still conforms to standards, because we're saying that one of our standards here is to ensure that any type of label or instructions or anything like that has to be within the native tongue of the country that it is being imported in. And in our case, it is English. I don't care how much Spanish speakers here or Chinese speakers or whatever speakers, our official language is English. In fact, the world is so,
you know, we are living in such a cosmopolitan world, you know, plural, the plurality and so on, that nowadays you have labels in more than one language.
Which is permitted. That's right. That's totally fine.
Of course, it's in the language of the country, but then there's nothing wrong in having it in Spanish as well.
Correct. Or any other language
that people.
But as I said, those things are not issues that we have here. The issues that we have is they're in a single foreign language. Mm-hmm. Toothpaste is there. Certain instructions for cars, right, are there. Refrigeration, electronics, right. Food. Many of these things they're just. And
yeah, I mean, sometimes you import these cars, you know, and you turn the thing on and you're hearing this Chinese language. You can't understand what it is. The what you call these, the sets, you know, and so on. You don't know how to operate them, so, and that sort of thing.
One of the most insidious things that I have seen is we would import goods to St. Kitts and Nevis. They would on the individual labels would have a foreign language, but on the customs forms and so forth, they are in English. Mm-hmm. So from the customs side, everything is in order. Here are the items. The ingredients are in English on the items. The instructions are on the farms and so forth. But when the product is being sold to a retail, it's a different story, right? So these kind of things slip through. And it seems like the importers know that they're not supposed to do it, because why would the customs forms be in English, but then when it comes down to the actual item, it is in a different language?
So
you know?
we've really been working on some standards and regulations to deal with that in terms of labeling, and working again closely with customs, training, looking at training and ensuring, like Mike said, you can't open every single package, of course, but products should not, especially products that you're putting in your body or on your body, creams and these things on face, and those things should always have an English translation, no matter what language it is. So we're really working towards getting some regulations for that. In terms of the in terms of the environment, I know we've been looking at an environmental management system standard, and that one is particularly important for businesses that want to operate, hotels, for example, in an environmentally sound manner, right? So that they can, also say, hey, we're a green hotel, for example, or a green restaurant, which is something that, again, attracts consumers and helps with economic growth in those particular sectors. So we are looking at standards in that regard. We're working again with the Ministry and Department of Environment in terms of that. So those are there are several things. I know Mr. Mike, his department has over 200 standards they're looking at, and that's just a drop in the bucket because there are tens of thousands of standards worldwide. So we're working hard. We're working hard to bring that sort of standards culture and quality culture here.
Yeah, Mr. Mike, I'm going to go to the phone lines, but I want you later to tell us some of the standards that your department is actually looking at and working on. Right? The numbers to call are 466-2666, 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. That is 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls.
Some of the standards that we're looking at, I'll probably just tell you the sector, right? So we're looking at stuff like wood, lumber, looking at steel, concrete and aggregates and that kind of thing, as well as tourism standards and some food standards in terms of like fresh fruits and agriculture. I mean, there are others, but those are essentially the main types. And so even when it comes to things like steel, we're saying, if you were to read those standards, I'm not really the expert on steel, but when you read those standards, you will see that no steel is supposed to be sold with rust on them, right? But I mean, you know how it is, you know how it is here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Even with some of the lumber, we just use lumber just like that. But then here in the standard, you're saying that depends on what lumber you're using, they can only be treated with such and such, or even when it comes to handrails, they may tell you that the lumber that is to be used is supposed to be untreated. Speaks to some of the construction standards. It speak to how what kind of concrete is supposed to be on a sidewalk. It speaks to even the pavement on the road, the aggregates and so forth that are to be in that. So there's a great deal of standards that we're looking at, as we said, over 200, I think it's like 211 or 212 standards that we are looking to adopt, which have already gone through the process. So just around the corner, they should be gazetted to say that we have officially adopted them for use. Most of them are from ASTM, that is an American based entity that is mostly for construction, and the engineering stuff and what's not. Then there is the Codex standards, which is mostly for food and agriculture. And then there is the ISO standards, which is, we were looking, as I said, a lot of the tourism and related services standard, especially when it comes to beach, because that is one of our natural resources that we have. We may not have oil and gold and so forth, but it is one of our natural resource, and we show tourism have actually started to implement some of the not recommendations, but the rules in the standard. So, for example, I'm not sure how, when you have been to the beach, but they are trying to put down bathrooms, like bathroom facilities, right? They're trying to have a lot of signage. They're trying to demarcate within the beach in terms of what is used for recreational swimming, what is used for sports and that kind of thing. They're trying to implement. Well, I've seen that they're trying to implement some of them. So, I mean, I kind of like where they're going with it and how they're using it. And it is a great marketing tool for them, actually, because when tourists see those kind of things happening, you know, you speak to their comfort level. You're speaking their language. All of a sudden, now you have this boom. And so forth, you get feedback and that kind of thing. You get more tourists, you get more, I guess everybody, you know, you get more coverage and money. Right.
So yes. So I go back to the point that I made earlier, and I know that I am belaboring that point, but standards, they are one thing. Ensuring the compliance of those standards is something else. What can you tell me in terms of the latter, in terms of ensuring the compliance with the standards? How does the Bureau of Standards, what role does it play in ensuring that you have inspectors or whatever that are ensuring that these standards are complied with?
So, sometimes, not all of the time, the purview falls under the Bureau of Standards. Mm-hmm. What we would be the gateway or the gatekeepers for those standards. So, for example, I just told you about tourism standards. We don't do anything about tourism, we don't know, but we are the gatekeepers and we know where to find those standards that tourism may need to use and enforce within their particular sector. So just like even with the vehicle standards, we can create a vehicle standard and the tourism is the one to enforce parts of that vehicle standard within their sector. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's not all the time that we would be the custodian, so to speak, of those technical regulations to enforce them.
So suppose I have a complaint. Who do I complain to? For example, if I have a complaint that something is not going according to the standard, who do I complain to? Is there a body that I can complain to? Is there somewhere that I can go to file my complaint? And if people are not complying with the standards, because we speak about the importance of those standards, especially we're talking about vehicle inspection.
Yes.
And the fact that if people don't comply with the standards for vehicle inspection, that they can create a lot of havoc in terms of health and safety and so on.
Well,
if
someone is not complying with the standard, there's not much you can do, except
to find them. You have an act, don't you? You have a Bureau of Standards.
Not if that's not if that standard is not being regulated. That standard has to be regulated. So, for example, if we have the labeling standard, if it is being regulated, right? Then if someone comes and to the Bureau and say, "Hey, look, so and so is not complying with the standard," then we can say, okay, we can either pass on the complaint to Consumer Affairs, or if it is under our purview, we can essentially take on the matter and find out what it is. Maybe somewhere under environment where they're saying, hey, this beach over here is letting wastewater into whatever the case may be. No, the relevant entities may be Sustainable Development, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, or the plus Bureau of Standards, of course, because we would come in from the testing and conformity assessment side, right? But all these government institutions would be coming into place if you were to make a complaint of that nature. So sometimes it's not just one, it is many, and sometimes it's one, and sometimes it falls under our purview, and sometimes it doesn't.
Dr. Natta, what can you tell me in terms of the Bureau and its relationships with probably other bureaus in terms of international cooperation, capacity building?
So I always smile when I talk about the Bureau and its mandate, because the mandate is for the Bureau as set out is to protect human health and the environment. Now that mandate to me encompasses everything. So in that regard, we have quite a number of affiliations. Mike mentioned the standards bodies. We are also the World Trade Organization's inquiry point for technical barriers to trade. We are the home for the Stockholm Convention, which deals with persistent organic pollutants, the Minamata Convention, which deals with mercury and mercury added products and so on. So, of course, metrology that we talked about, and so we are affiliated with organizations that deal with the science of measurement. So our reach is so vast, regionally and internationally, that we have lots of meetings and seminars that officers have to be a part of. So at the Bureau, it's really a great opportunity. I'm not trying to do a job pitch, but the opportunities are vast because of all of these interconnectivities with all of these various international and regional organizations, for our officers to gain a lot of experience and a lot of real-world experience. Because, again, as you mentioned, we have a laboratory, and that laboratory deals with chemistry, microbiology, metrology, air quality. We have our standards departments. So when you think about that, all of these opportunities are there for capacity building. And although we are a small entity, what we often try to do is encourage officers, even if you're a chemist in the chemistry lab, to also work with the microbiology department, to work with the air quality department. So again, we sort of building a cadre of officers who have varied experiences, varied skills, and continue to develop these skills as well.
Right. So recently you had the World Metrology Day, yes, which was on the 20th.
The 20th of May.
The 20th of May.
Correct.
What was the focus of that day, Mr. Mike? World Metrology.
I don't. To be honest, we have to be honest with you at this point.
And I think that the theme was metrology in the digital era, right?
Okay, but
so my question is, how is digitalization helping in transforming metrology or revolutionizing the area of metrology?
So I could probably jump in a little bit on that. None of us are actually in the metrology department, so we would leave that for the expert.
Yes.
But we all work in the Bureau of Standards. So of course, metrology is the science of measurement, and a lot of symbols that you see typically for metrology and their organizations is still a ruler or a slide rule and these kind of things. So I know the theme this year, this is 2022, everything is electronic, or most things are electronic and digital. And so the emphasis there was on the digitization of a lot of the work that's happening in metrology. So, for example, in the medical field, blood pressure gauges have gone from being, mercury-filled thermometers and nurse squeezes the little tube and so on, to digital, temperometers, which are the ones that check your temperature in your ear and so on. Even the regular thermometers that check your body temperature, all of these are digital. So what metrology looks at is how can we make sure these things, now that they've gone digital, are accurate? Because I can tell you there's still a lot of people in the field, nurses in particular, who do not like the digital equipment. They feel it's less accurate. So metrology is the field that now comes in and looks at verifying these devices, calibrating them frequently and on a regular basis to ensure that what they're reading is correct.
Yes, and I'm happy that you touched on that, because especially now with the COVID, we have a lot of these thermometers, like thermometer guns and all of these things. Who actually deals with the calibrating of those to ensure that they're giving some sort of a correct reading?
Our metrology department verifies these temperature guns. I can't promise you that every single one was verified by us, but I can tell you in our school system, those that the schools are using, they first brought them, the Ministry of Education or the schools themselves brought them to the Bureau for verification. Of course, over time, and if they're misused, they're dropped and so on, the readings could be slightly altered. So we still want to encourage persons to visit the Bureau and have these devices verified. We verified them free of charge for everyone. I don't think we charge anyone any fees in that regard, because
if they're not properly calibrated, the confusion and what can happen because of that. The improper reading and
certain number of clicks that you can only pull the trigger a certain amount of times before the calibration is out, right? So we, as Dr. Natta said, we urge them to still bring in their thermometers to make sure that they are reading properly.
And there are some of them now that, it's not the guns, they have them stationed, you just look at them like that, and they give you some sort of, they even speak to you, they tell you to wear a mask when you're not wearing a mask, and things like that.
Yeah. So our metrology officers are quite good, and they would be able to verify these types of devices and other electronic devices. Even scales are now, measuring scales with weights and so on, are going digital, and we again offer that service at the Bureau of Standards where we verify scales. That's another critical thing, because again, even restaurants, you may be weighing something to prepare a meal, and that deals again with health for human health and so on. So we encourage persons to use the Bureau of Standards. We have a lot of services that we provide, so you can easily come by and inquire.
Especially within the health sector, the scales can be quite useful for you, especially if you're recommending medication based on BMI and those kind of things. You for sure need to ensure that your scales are calibrated and reading correctly.
Right.
Yes. Or maybe it was for blood pressure or whatever the case may be, as long as you're recommending medication based on weight. And when you go to the hospital, they always ask you your weight and that kind of thing,
Right. So they have to be calibrated and recalibrated?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Calibration for us lasts for around 6 months for scales, especially those that are used for trade, usually last around 6 months.
And then after that you have to recalibrate.
Correct. Correctly.
And
Correct.
even at the Bureau, we have to make sure our devices that we are using to calibrate other devices are calibrated. So we have to calibrate our own equipment as well.
So if you ever go out and you see a scale, a balance being used for trade, and you do not see our sticker on it, the SKNBS, to prove that it is that scale is probably not calibrated and authorized for use. It is actually a requirement if you're using a scale for trade to sell somebody something. It's actually a requirement to have it verified and calibrated.
Okay. Now, Dr. Natter, you said that the Bureau of Standards was not accredited, but that you were in the process of having it accredited. Now, which accreditation body would you have to apply to have it accredited?
Well, I don't want to necessarily name names, right? Because that's a service you pay for. Yeah. And we have, you know, of course, globally there are many accreditation bodies. I can tell you that within the region, here, within our Caribbean region, we have an accreditation body in Jamaica. And so, of course, we kind of look to them first and foremost before we look outside of the region. And Trinidad also offers some services in accreditation and certification as well. And of course, there's those in the UK, the US, and other countries. So we haven't narrowed it down to a specific accreditation body as yet, but as I said, we have one that accreditation body for sure that's within our region, and that would make probably geographical sense to utilize. But you can essentially use any accreditation body globally, if you wish.
Is there any sort of a time frame that you're looking at in terms of, you know, probably you will be accredited by a particular date? Sure.
Mm-hmm. Our intention right now and again, I mentioned accreditation for pH testing in our chemistry lab, and also looking at toxic gases, accreditation for toxic gases in air quality. We are really working towards having that accreditation by December 31st, 2022. So now I've set the date out there on the World Wide Web. You might put me in trouble, but we are really working hard, Mr. Mike and his team, you know, and my fellow colleagues at the Bureau, to really get accredited to those two particular sets of analyses by the end of this year. So that's our task, and we are working assiduously towards that.
Okay, good. Now, Mr. Mike, how many vehicle inspection places we have in St. Kitts? Do you know?
I don't know, but last time with the amount of stakeholders that came, there was around 22 stakeholders that came there that were not of the Bureau of Standards or a vehicle driver or anything like that. So at least 22. That's what I saw. At least.
In order to provide that service, they have to be authorized by the traffic, is it?
Yes.
Traffic has to authorize them.
Yes. Yes, correct. That's how it, yes, go ahead.
Our goal, Mr. Mike could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our goal as well would be at the end of the task of completing this inspection standard for vehicles, to have these bodies be certified, right, to carry out the inspection. That's the goal, so that Leslie Williams Mechanic Shop can say, have a nice certificate saying he's a licensed and authorized and certified inspector for vehicle inspections.
Okay. And what that means is that the person would have undergone a particular training,
and as well as being inspected themselves,
and be
assessed to make sure.
Okay, good.
They meet the standards.
Okay. It's a myriad of things. Right. So you have to. It should be a rigorous process to ensure that they are very qualified to do that inspection.
Exactly.
So they themselves will have to be inspected or audited, assessed.
Right.
To do the same inspection.
So you still don't have any time frame, no date in mind when the public can expect to have those standards?
Just started the conversation. Just started the conversation. When I said just started the conversation, to legitimize it then, right? So, I mean, I am trying to be optimistic and ambitious, And I want to say that we can have it done by in 1 year, right? I would like to say that because we have resources like CrossQ that can help us. We have the resources of other bureaus that can help us in this aspect. We already have a regional standard from Bahamas, which is part of CARICOM, which they have the same concerns and so forth that we have. We are not really unique in that aspect. Other Caribbean countries do have it, right? So
other Caribbean countries do have
no, they do have the concerns.
only concerns, but they do not have the standard.
Correct. I think St. Lucia has it, and I know Bahamas have it. Right?
They have standards with respect to that.
Yes, I'm not sure if Jamaica or Trinidad has it and Barbados and so forth, but I know those two specifically, they do have it.
So you are looking to them as a sort of as a guide.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of the best practices.
Yes. In the beginning, it may not be. In the beginning, it may not be too cumbersome, but it's just to legitimize, to make sure that what they say that they are doing, they're doing. Just like when Dr. Natter said, when it comes to the accreditation process, we already know what we're supposed to do, and we already know what we're doing. Is to ensure that you do it, right? I could say with a chuckle that when we mention that.
But ensuring that you do it depends on you. You're the ones who have to do it.
Yeah. Well, can be. It doesn't necessarily, that's what I said earlier, it can be where we are the ones that do the certification process, but we may not, there's also the arm of the police to ensure that, because they're the ones that they have to go through. We can't just take it away. As the scene develops when it comes to that, I will be sure to come back if I'm invited to let you know how it is progressing. Yes, but it is very early at this point in time to say.
Right, but somebody has to take the ball and somebody has to run with it.
Yes. Well, we've taken the ball.
Right, so therefore you run with it.
Okay.
I think we're out of time, but is there anything that you want to say before we go?
Well, speaking of the vehicle standard, I would just we should have another meeting sometime in next month. We've already sent out the emails and whatnot. So we have already sent out the emails of the standards. We have already sent out a sample of the inspection certificates and so forth to those that attended. But even if there are other people out there that have not attended, we would still like them to attend. Although I don't have the exact date here, persons can call into the Bureau of Standards at 467-1498. They can ask for me or the director or whomever, and we can give you an update on the date. Typically, we usually have it at the Nagico building, which is where our Ministry of Trade headquarters is. And that is where we have that meeting to take place for next month. So I'm urging people, stakeholders and so forth, to try and be a part of the process because it is important. It is a matter of safety. It is a matter of concern. It's a matter of trust within the public. So we are urging people to come and participate. In terms of standards on a whole, even though some of the standards are not per se regulated, the public has a lot of power, and they know certain things are wrong based on the complaints that Consumer Affairs, which is in the Ministry of Trade, just like us, and as well as the Bureau of Standards, as well as health, we know consumers know what certain standards are, because the world is a global world right now, right? No place is too far in this day and age. So the internet is right there for everybody to gain knowledge. And so we're asking them to do some of the policing for us at this point in time where there's an absence of regulation, because they do have the power to say, I'm not buying that, right? Because it does not meet a particular standard.
Yes. Dr. Natter? Mr. Williams, we had a great conversation, and I hope the general public, gain some knowledge about accreditation standards and what we actually do at the Bureau of Standards. So World Accreditation Day, just to remind persons, is coming up on June 9th, and you can look forward to seeing things in social media, online, about World Accreditation Day from the Bureau of Standards. Now, accreditation is one of the main pillars that deals with what we call a quality infrastructure, and the Bureau of Standards, we are trying to build a quality culture here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So along with accreditation and standards and metrology and testing, inspection and market surveillance, all of these things, we are hoping to change persons' mindsets and their behaviors as it pertains to quality and what to expect from a product, a process, or a service. So World Accreditation Day speaks to sustainability and economic growth and the environment, and our challenge is how do we meet the needs of all of our people within the means of what the planet offers. And accreditation is critical to that because, as we spoke about earlier, accreditation to standards, internationally recognized standards, helps to improve efficiency, helps you to optimize processes. If you're doing that, you're using less natural resources. All of our resources are not renewable, so it helps us to manage and use resources better. So we want to continue to encourage persons to visit the Bureau of Standards, whether it's our website or coming in personally. We're on Facebook as well, we're on Instagram, and learn more about our services. And, just inquire. Teachers, you're welcome, reach out to us, bring your students, let us visit your classrooms so we can continue to build on this quality culture that we want to create here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So thank you once again for having us.
Well, thank you to both of you, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us today on some of the work that you're doing at the Bureau of Standards. I do know that the Bureau of Standards officials have been here several times on this program, and I know that your director, Mr. Stuart Laplace, is very passionate about marketing the work of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards so that everybody can know what you are doing and come to appreciate the work that the Bureau is doing in terms of, and as the theme for this year's World Accreditation, they say sustainability in economic growth and the environment. Extremely important. So thank you to both of you. Okay. I want to thank all of our listeners to today's Working for You program. Next week we'll be back with another edition of Working for You. Until then, take care. I am Les Roy Williams.